Let's see. Walter, would you offer our prayer to start us off this afternoon?
Sure.
Great. Thanks so much.
Heavenly Father, we are thankful for this good day, and we are thankful for all the many things we've been blessed with, and please bless that we will be able to learn a lot from this class, and that we will be able to learn more about history, and please bless that we will have a good rest of the day, and we say this in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks a lot, Walter. Class, you may notice that we do have a new student today, and I'm excited about this student. It's actually my wife, Christina Gentile, and so she'll be joining us.
Hi, Christina.
Hi. So, Christina, we have Wendy and then Walter with us so far today.
Okay.
Do you want to say hi or introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi. I'm Mr. Gentile's wife, and I was also a history major in college, so I really enjoy history, so I'm really excited to take the class.
Well, great. Thanks a lot. And I will try very hard not to call you sweetie in front of the rest of the class. It might be hard to do, but okay. Well, let's get started. I am really just thrilled today about our topic. We're going to talk about the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms by Jefferson and Dickson, July 6th of 1775. And there's this wonderful line that I hope you were able to read: "Resolved to die free men rather than live slaves." And that's really the crux of the argument that we're going to discuss today. And then, of course, as usual, we're going to start with some context for the situation. And hello, Heidi. I see that you joined us.
Hi.
How are you today?
Great, thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, this is a very famous painting. Does anybody know the artist for this one? This is the Lone Rider. Any art history buffs out there? This,
We've seen it.
You have seen it? This one
no,
is...
I've never seen it.
Oh, never seen it. Oh, okay. This is actually done by Grant Wood, a famous American painter from the Bible Belt, and he did lots of paintings of Americana. He's noted especially for his idealized depictions of life that are also social commentaries. And personally, I've always loved his little trees. But here he is, and here he's portraying Paul Revere as this lone rider. What do you think Grant Wood is trying to say? Let's see, did anybody just hear a buzzing? I think it's getting a little bit better. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll just ask you if you could all please try to mute when you're not talking. That might help us be able to hear a little bit better as a class. Thank you so much. And then, of course, when you talk, just unmute, and then we can hear you. But if we look at this painting, what do you think Wood is trying to get us to think about?
It was dark.
It was dark, okay. Definitely. So this happened at night, right? The night of April 18th into the morning of April 19th, 1775. Excellent. What else do you see there?
The prominence of the steeple on the church and the light coming onto that.
Excellent, right? Prominence of God and His hand in the event, right? Light on the steeple, right? More than anything else. Excellent point, Wendy. What else do we see here? What is he trying to emphasize, as well as those things that have been mentioned? Well, I'll maybe provide a little bit of help here. The painting is called The Lone Rider, and it's very interesting because there is a myth that has become part of popular memory of Paul Revere alone riding through the Massachusetts countryside, single-handedly warning that the British are coming. Now, of course, he didn't say the British are coming because they were all British at that point. And so there really wasn't that distinction that we think of today between the Americans and the British because they were all British. But he certainly did say the redcoats are coming, the lobsterbacks are coming, the regulars are coming out, that sort of thing. But it's interesting because we need to realize that if Paul Revere had been the only one out that night, there wouldn't have been many who would have been able to respond to the call in the magnitude with which they did respond to the call of those British troops marching all the way from Boston Harbor, 16 and a half miles past Menotomy Road, out northwest to eventually Concord. stopping at Lexington first. And so it's important to remember that there were many, many riders. We hear about Revere, we hear about William Dawes, we hear about Samuel Prescott, who was actually the only one to actually get all the way to Concord. He's actually one of Concord's favorite sons. Died in Concord. If you go to Concord, there's a grave site to him there. But it's interesting to note that by this time, the Americans, what we call the Americans, they were watching the British so closely that they had a very intricate system of alarm riders set up. Not just Paul Revere, even though he did much great work that night and was very influential. And so just keep in mind that really by 1775, the tide has turned, especially the tide of popular opinion, against the British. And so we have a countryside in uprising when they hear of this news of the march to Concord. And it truly will become the point of no return. Here is a famous print by Amos Doolittle, who actually was a militiaman from Connecticut who joined the fighting along with hundreds and hundreds of others from the area. And he did these prints of the Battle of Lexington and then, as we'll see, the Concord fight and the retreat back to Boston of the British. He did them 2 weeks after the battle. And so as far as historians can understand, these are the most accurate representations of what it was actually like on April 19th of 1775. So here's Lexington Green. And Heidi, you visited Lexington, is that right?
Yes.
Did it look something similar to this, the green?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore, right? A little bit different. Got some main roads going through there. That's right.
It's a park.
Mm-hmm.
At least the Battle Green is different than up at Lexington at the bridge. This looks like it's at the Battle Green.
That's right. So this is the Battle Green in Lexington. In fact, if you see over here to the right of the picture, they've actually taken this alarm tower and they've moved it all the way up a hill about a half a mile away. But yeah, some of these buildings, this one here, this one, they're still there, but they basically have sort of cut out this little green, and then there are roads coming along either side of it.
Yeah,
so,
and also there's great big trees there and things now, too. It's not just a great big open field.
Definitely. Excellent. Thank you for pointing that out, Heidi. Very true. And so just to get us in the spirit of things here with these, like I said, sort of almost reportorial quality photos or paintings here. This is the old graveyard in Concord, and I think it's interesting to note here that many of these buildings are still around. They've actually filled in much of this pond back here. But if you want to see what it looks like today, because my wife and I actually lived in Concord, here it is today, and you can still see here is the tavern that is in this picture here, right over there, and you can still see the road here that's coming east and west, right there, and then this is Concord Center. Obviously the churches are gone, but the graveyard is still the same graveyard that we see in the Doolittle print. And so here are the British officers surveying, and they're looking off towards Concord Bridge, which we'll see in the next Doolittle print, and here is the bridge, and it's important to note that when you hear the phrase, the shot heard round the world, that they were actually talking about the shot that was ordered by the American militia from Concord to be fired upon the British regulars, because that was the first time that the order had been given officially to fire upon the king's troops with this united show of militia resistance. And so this here on Concord Bridge is the shot heard round the world. It's commonly mistaken for the first shot that nobody knows who fired in Lexington, as we saw in Lexington Green. But the shot heard around the world from the famous poem here took place on this bridge. And then here it is today. Here's the bridge. My wife and I went to the reenactment on April 19th, and as you can see, this bridge actually has been reconstructed several different times, but the British were coming here. So the hill with the graveyard is out over this way. They marched along down the road and then came to try to cross the bridge here. They actually crossed the bridge, went back. The Concord militia came from down the hill at Buttrick's Farm and then stood their ground on the bridge, and the first shots were fired here. Actually were able to turn the British, and they fled, and it was quite a shock to the American militia that they'd actually turned the King's troops here on the North Bridge. And then, of course, 16 and a half miles back to Boston, incredibly heavy casualties on the part of the British, as we'll see. It was 2 to 1. They had twice as many casualties as the Americans did. And it was quite the ordeal. Lots of very interesting stories from this day. Of course, because this is a World History Survey, we don't have the time to get into all of the stories, but there are lots of neat stories of grandmothers who were out in their yards and they saw some British troops who'd gotten lost from their patrol, the flanking patrols that were out to try to flush the colonials out of the woods. And one grandmother in particular was able to capture single-handedly 6 British regulars, which was kind of neat. There are also lots of resistance, house-to-house fighting. This is where the bloodiest fighting occurred. In fact, this is where most of the American casualties were suffered as well. Lots of immobile grandfathers, especially those who had fought in the French and Indian War, who stood their ground and ended up facing death at the hands of these British patrols that were out, and certainly enraged after what had happened at the bridge. But as we can see here at the bottom, there were 94 American casualties total, and then 272 for the British. 65 killed, 180 wounded, 27 missing. But in my research on Marblehead, I just wanted to try to make events a little bit more real to you by taking a moment to look at the local impact of Lexington and Concord, this famous day of April 19th, 1775 that we celebrate perhaps every year. I'm not sure what the traditions are in your home, but I know it's an important day in our house. But could I get someone here to just read this? This is from a journal entry from a local Marbleheader talking about this April 19th day.
I will, but can I first ask, on that first painting you showed us, that was obviously a modern painting?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And but it seems like he was kind of passing on the same myth, that there was a lone rider.
That's right. In fact, the reason why he painted the Lone Rider is because he was trying to poke fun at the people who only think of the Lone Rider.
Okay.
So it was ironic. It was sort of a satire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ashley Bowen described that fateful day in his journal, quote, "A hubbub as no truth goes, a hubbub about soldiers, news from afar, talks of war," unquote. The unbelievable hubbub about soldiers was correct. On that April day, armed conflict had replaced resistance, and war had come to the colonies, where it would stay for almost a decade. Colonel Francis Smith's expedition to seize military stores at Concord had left 50 men from Massachusetts dead, 39 wounded, and 5 missing. 4 towns in Essex County, Beverly, Danvers, Lynn, and Salem, suffered casualties from the fighting. The British killed 1 man from Beverly, 7 from Danvers, 4 from Lynn, and 1 from Salem. 3 men from Beverly, 2 from Danvers, and 2 from Lynn suffered wounds. Joseph Bell from Danvers and Josiah Breed from Lynn did not return from the day's fighting and were labeled missing.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that. Well read. And I just want to say here, I wanted to try to help us understand the very real impact that this had on local communities. For example, Marblehead is located in Essex County, and so I just took this county alone and gave some statistics for you. It's interesting to know. I mean, imagine, you all live in various places around this area, but imagine if rather than 1 from Beverly, 7 from Danvers, 4 from Lynn, 1 from Salem, what if it was 1 from Highland, 7 from Alpine, 4 from American Fork, 1 from Pleasant Grove. I mean, these are people who you may have known, you may have heard about, maybe you bumped into them into the store, and now they've been killed. They've been shot and killed by the King's men. This is truly will be a moment that Americans cannot shake off. They cannot forgive, and it will lead them to the war, the shooting war that will last for 8 years. So this is incredibly important. I would also point, too, that it's interesting in Marblehead that the reaction to this had multiple levels of effect. And I'll read this one here. The spilling of their neighbors' blood sent Marbleheaders into a frenzy of activity. On April 22nd, as the lively blocked Marblehead's harbor, Ashley Bowen recorded that Father Bowen took his flight to the farm to seek refuge from a rumored British invasion. Nathan Bowen was certainly not alone in evacuating Marblehead following Lexington and Concord. In the next week, his son would write, "Most of our people moving, most of our people gone out of the town with their goods. All of our countrymen have turned their houses into pawnbroker shops to receive the Marblehead men's goods." Bowen was not alone in recording his observations of his fleeing neighbors and the upheaval caused by the shot heard round the world. Isaac Mansfield, a repentant addresser, described watching Marblehead's opulent merchants leaving their stands for business, submitting their property to be sacrificed, and retiring to interior parts for immediate safety, another class of citizens being obliged to do the same, and a different class forced into the land and sea service to fight, contrary to their former habits, beside another class that took joyfully to the spoiling of their goods and stood by their stuff. On April 28th, Bowen summarized the situation by adding the following with more than a tinge of sarcasm: glorious times for the country. And so what different groups do we see here in this quote from Marblehead?
The poor, the rich, and the people taking advantage of the situation.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Wendy. Right? And so think about this event splitting up neighborhoods, splitting up towns, splitting up families. Some saying, I'm going to fight against the British now. You know, they've spilled my family's blood. They've spilled my neighbor's blood. They spilled my countrymen's blood. Or we have people fleeing because they said, well, wait, I don't want to be part of this war. Right? I'm a loyalist, or I haven't been able to make my mind yet, and I need to leave. And of course, you have people, as Wendy said, taking advantage of the situation. Really, we see, I mean, just if you think about sort of, the Los Angeles riots, in the early 90s, we have people taking advantage of other people. We have lawlessness and anarchy at times as a reaction to this incredibly shocking event. And also, just to say, too, it's very interesting to note here that there are many people that after this event, this really was the time where if people in a town had been showing signs of not wanting to be as resistant as perhaps some other patriots were, after Lexington and Concord, they lost all leniency in the patriot majority's actions towards them. This was when, okay, the line's been drawn in the sand, and you're either with us or you're against us. And I think it's interesting here as we see different town meetings calling for certain sanctions. And so the bottom line here, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, is just to resist, meaning the patriot majority, to resist was to place one's life in jeopardy. Because, as Ronald Tagney has explained, after blood had spilled on April 19th, public sentiments demanded recantation from Tories who still had not disclaimed their addresses of the previous year. And these are addresses to Governor Hutchinson when he was leaving. And so you can see that all these old skeletons in the closet came out, and the point of no return had come. It was this final ultimatum of recant, meaning formally withdraw your words of support for the British government or risk your lives, because they would be labeled as enemies to their country. So keep that in mind. While Marblehead was having all of its own interesting issues going on at the local level, as well as all of the other towns in the colonies, think of Marblehead as just a microcosm. But while all of that was going on the ground, if we go back and up to the big picture, right, and these big events that are going to affect the colonies as a whole proto-national unit, right, we have the Second Continental Congress, which is called to meet May 10th, 1775 in Philadelphia. They do a lot of different things. First, that we'll talk about, May 15th, they formally decide to counter the British force against them at Lexington and Concord with their own force. They say, okay, the line has been drawn, and now we are going to wage war. As much as we can do that at this point, even though we don't really have an official national government with which to do that, but we're going to declare it as if we did. At this point, once those British troops who were on the battle road, going all the way back from Concord, all the way back to the east and then to the south, back into Boston, to the safety of Boston, well, once they got back and had suffered all those casualties, they hunkered down, they tried to deal with the wounded, they tried to deal with the colonials who formed a circular siege around the city of Boston, not allowing the British troops to get out. So the British troops were then trapped in Boston. And so the Continental Congress decides to take military control of this siege that would keep the British troops hunkered down in Boston for months and months and months, all the way through March of 1776. And as we see during this time, we have the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, Heidi, you've been to Bunker Hill, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about Bunker Hill?
Well, it's really Breed's Hill. I know it's misnamed.
That's right.
What do I remember about it? It's just kind of a dome-shaped hill. Looks out towards the harbor. There's a great big monument on it that you can climb up to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else to say.
That's great. No, that's great, right? Because if we think about the geography of what would be misnamed the Battle of Bunker Hill, right? As Heidi pointed out correctly, it was Breed's Hill. Bunker Hill is actually a hill further west. But June 17th, at the very bottom of that long, sloping, dome-shaped hill, we have this Boston Harbor. And so in Boston Harbor, we have British troops who try to break out of this siege, and they try to rout the colonials who are at the top. They try 3 different times to charge up the hill, and just imagine what you've probably seen in perhaps movies or what you've read about from World War II, where at the top of the hill we have a trench, and we have men who have trained their guns, trained their sights down on the British. The British try to come up, and they end up losing 50. They have a 54% casualty rate. Because it is so difficult to storm this hill. And in fact, they would not have succeeded in storming the hill unless the Americans they would not have succeeded if the Americans had not have run out of ammunition, which is sort of sad for them. But Bunker Hill was incredibly important because it showed the British that the Americans weren't pushovers, that they meant business, and that they could do battle with the King's troops. And so that's all going on. At the same time, we have in the month of May the capture of Fort Ticonderoga by Ethan Allen of Vermont, and then Benedict Arnold, who before he was a traitor was a brilliant commander for the American colonials and was actually a hero revered from colony to colony. And so it was such a shock when he betrayed his country. But it was captured, and it was interesting because the cannon from Ticonderoga by winter of 1775-1776 would become incredibly important in forcing the British, who were hunkered down in Boston during that siege, forcing them to finally leave, which they would do in March, along with lots of loyalists who had come to Boston for refuge. Also, the Second Continental Congress decides to raise 6 companies of riflemen. They named General Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. This is a momentous event because here they are taking power to themselves and truly acting like... Wendy, you can't... Let's see. Hold on a second. Okay, hold on. I see a message here. Somebody can't hear me. Is that correct?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. No, Caden was just wondering if we could hear him.
Good. It's working.
Oh, okay.
This is great.
Okay, hello, Caden. Welcome.
Thanks.
Can everyone else hear me? Is that all right?
Yeah,
Yes.
it was just Kaden
Okay.
that I couldn't hear.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't just talking to myself. I do that a lot, but not now. Okay. Well, so we had the Second Continental Congress. Washington, a Virginian, which is very important because Virginia had always been this flagship colony. Washington is at the helm now. But it's very interesting because if you look at sort of this first page of what the Second Continental Congress did, we see all of these messages of, okay, we're going to fight, we're going to build a national army, we're going to counter force with force. On the other hand, it's also important to note, and this is so important in terms of context to Jefferson and Dickson's Declaration of the Causes and Necessities of Taking Up Arms, which you read. But on the other hand, we have Dickson who pens an olive branch petition, which is endorsed by the Congress. This petition professes loyalty to George III. So even after all of this, right, professes loyalty to George III and pleads with him to negotiate a reconciliation because he is that father figure, and the colonies are trying in this last-ditch effort to try to get him to appeal for their case. It doesn't happen. They also adopt the Declaration of the Causes and Necessities of Taking Up Arms, which you've read, which is a formal justification of military resistance, this decision to counterforce with force, and it's also a brilliant summary of America's case against Britain. This is July 6th. So think of it. July 5th, we want reconciliation. July 6th, okay, here's why we're fighting. And, of course, in late July, it's interesting because the Congress rejects Lord North's conciliatory proposition, which was basically saying, well, listen, we'll make some compromises, but at the same time, we still have authority over you, and you need to know that we're going to exercise that authority. But let's make sure that we stop this shooting war together here. But of course, they reject it, and that's important to note here. So there's a quote that I wanted to read that I just thought was so telling. And Walter, would you read that quote for us, please?
Sure. There may have been something approaching a whimsical cast to these summer proceedings, so John Adams characterized them. Congress could not seem to make up its mind. It prepared for war while it begged for peace. It proclaimed its determination to protect American liberties while it petitioned for reconciliation. It expressed respect for the king while it promised death to his armies.
Okay, so with that quote in mind about how breaking up is hard to do, just see if you can reason. Why do you think the Second Continental Congress sent so many messages at once?
Well, from reading this, the reading that we did over the weekend, it's pretty clear that he's saying we're prepared to fight and we're fighting and we'll stop as soon as you give us what we want. So to me, the message is we're fighting until you give us what we want.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that excellent reasoning, Wendy. Any other thoughts?
No, I'd just say probably that last-ditch effort of desperation. Trying to come up with some kind of plan other than war.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that. Well, if we relate this to ourselves, have you ever been in a situation in which you acted like the Second Continental Congress during the summer of 1775?
Yes, but not one I would share.
Okay, and I appreciate that, Wendy. Thank you so much. Let me just say, as I thought about this, I have also thought, too, there are some times in life that are just so complex, and, we have an ultimate goal, and so to work for that goal, we try one thing, we try another, we keep trying to extend forgiveness or mercy, but at the same time, we're trying to stand up for ourselves, and just life can be so complicated, and I just hope we appreciate the complexity of this situation facing the Second Continental Congress in 1775. It was no easy thing to cut ties with Britain and to just branch out on their own. It would take lots of time and effort and blood and just everything that a people could give, as we're going to see. And so if we look here, it's interesting that George III's reaction, this royal proclamation of rebellion, August 23rd, 1775. Caden, would you read that for us? This is what he says here to the Second Continental Congress.
All right. Whereas many of our subjects in diverse parts of our colonies and plantations in North America, misled by dangerous and ill-designing men, and forgetting the allegiance which they owe to the power that has protected and supported them, after various disorderly acts committed in disturbance of the public peace, to the obstruction of lawful commerce, and to the oppression of our loyal subjects carrying on the same, have at length proceeded to open and avowed rebellion.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
So basically, George received the olive branch petition and just scoffed, and he penned this and said, listen, you are in open rebellion, and now we are going to put you down. We are going to flex our muscles and show you the strength of the British Empire, bring you to your knees and to your senses. Well, it's interesting to see what happens. So if we think then about what's going on, and we think about these two great writers, Jefferson on the one hand and Dickson on the other, they pen this official letter of protest and this statement of why we're declaring war that you've read for today, this declaration of the causes and necessities taking up arms. And I want to look at it here, and I want to try to really focus our 4Ring today on specific paragraphs. I think that might help our 4Ring to be perhaps a little more fruitful. We'll see. But if we look at paragraph 1 on page 26, so if you have that, would you please turn to paragraph 1? Hopefully you've already been able to do the reading, which is the research phase of the 4Rs. And so the first question I want to ask you is a reasoning question. From your reading of this declaration, reason, what is the purpose of the declaration? And if you can find a line that helps explain your answer, that's even better.
Just a warning, and the line would be, rendered it necessary for us to close with this last appeal from reason to arms.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you so much, right? This last appeal, okay? Think of it. This has been going on for now over 10 years from the beginning of the Grenville program in 1764 to this bloodletting at Lexington and Concord. And so, did you catch what does it say about God here, which I just think is really neat?
That our reverence for God is what leads us to the conclusion that we create governments to protect our rights and to promote our welfare.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Wendy. Right, I love that. But a reverence for our Creator, principles of humanity, and the dictates of common sense must convince all those who reflect upon the subject that government was instituted to promote the welfare of mankind. And I love how in the very beginning here it talks about that the divine author of our existence intended part of the human race to uphold an absolute property. He's saying, if it's possible that this is the case, wait a minute, right? And of course he's saying it's not. Right? That's not what God intends. And so what does he say about slavery? Were you able to reason out? What does he say about slavery? Walter, do you remember what this declaration says about slavery?
Well, it says, I just had it. I think it's saying right here that Great Britain is attempting to effect the cruel and politic purpose of enslaving these colonies by violence.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, right? It's very interesting to note that this was the language that was so commonly used in these documents. Literally, they talked about slavery, that what Britain was doing was enslaving the colonies, and they were fighting against that. They were standing up for their liberties. And so with that said then, right, reason, what does this declaration say about the purpose of government? This first paragraph even. And we mentioned part of it.
Well, this first paragraph says the government was instituted to promote the welfare of mankind and ought to be administered for the attainment of that end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if it's not doing good, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Excellent, right? And what did Locke say was the purpose of government? The only purpose?
Protect our natural rights.
Sorry.
That's right. Protect our natural rights. Go ahead. Is that Caden?
Yeah, you know what? I was actually going to say that too, because in this very paragraph, I just barely found it, but it talks about how the people of 1 second. Let me get to it real quick. It talks about how the human race. It says the human race to hold an absolute property and an unbounded power over others, marked by this infinite goodness and wisdom, as the objects of a legal domination, never rightfully resistible, however severe and oppressive. I was thinking, you know, if property is an inalienable right, and I thought it seems like governments in history have tried to say that humans are property, and there was a quote from one of the founders or someone in history who said that there are those people who believe that humans were born with saddles on their back, and they were born with the reins or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, and as Heidi said, government's job is to protect our inalienable rights given to us from God.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, you know, if they cross that line, I'd say that's time to take up arms, because if we do have inalienable rights from God, which we do, and we're a virtuous people and we're ripe for independence, then that is time to rise up. So yeah, that's That's my thought.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Caden. Excellent, right? So then if we relate then, right, how do these things apply to us?
Ooh. Go ahead, Susan. Okay, I was thinking maybe this applies to us because I think it was one of the philosophers during this time period said that America is ripe for independence because America is virtuous, and they are laborious. The three words he used were they are laborious. They're frugal, industrious, and honest, meaning that they're ripe for independence. But then he compared that to England. England was all they wanted was entertainment and amusement. And I look at America today, and it really shows what we value. America as a whole, I ask if we are we frugal or industrious or honest, or are we seeking amusement and entertainment? So America today, are we ripe for independence or are we ripe for slavery? Are we looking too much towards government to grant us with security, or are we looking to government to protect our freedoms? So that's how it relates to us, you know.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's great relating, Caden. Thanks so much for that comment. Well, let's look here, page 27. If we flip over to page 27, so and this hopefully is becoming clearer and clearer now as we talk about this. So can you reason, when did things start to go wrong in the colonies, according to Jefferson? What does he say about that?
Right after the French and Indian War.
Excellent. And can you find a quote that talks about that?
Towards the conclusion of that war, on the fourth line, it pleased our sovereign to make a change in his counsels. From that fatal moment, the affairs of the British Empire began to fall into confusion.
Excellent, right? Excellent. So from that fatal moment, we have this debt from the French and Indian War. We have the British financial world in shambles. Grenville tries to do something about it. He does what would be the wrong thing, as history would judge, because he just creates a domino effect of what becomes perceived depression that continues to make the colonies protest. This protest leads into resistance. Resistance leads into revolt. Revolt leads into revolution. And then we have a shooting war, which is what we have now in terms of what we're talking about. And so what offenses then does he go on to list? He lists lots of them. But on page 27, what are some of the British offenses that Jefferson lists? A whole slew of them there for you.
Yeah, I've got them all listed. Undertaken to give and grant our money without our consent. That statutes have been passed for extending the jurisdiction of courts beyond their limits, that there was no trial by jury, that they suspended the legislature of one of the colonies, that they suspended basically their commerce, their trading, and that they altered their form of government that had been established by the charter that they had set up, that there was no trial for those that had murdered the colonists. I didn't really understand the erecting in a neighboring province. I don't know what that is. It just says erecting a despotism dangerous to our very existence. I wasn't sure what that was.
Yeah, think of the Quebec Act.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Anyway. That was...
Were they allowed the Catholics to come back into power?
They took away representative government. They extended the borders of Quebec, and they took away trial by jury. so they were thinking that, wait a minute, is this going to be us next? So.
Okay. And then the quartering of soldiers, and then also that they would transport those colonists that had been charged with any offenses back to England to be tried.
Excellent.
Right? There was 10 that I came up with.
Yeah, wonderfully done, Heidi. And where were so many of them taken from? Which last infuriating acts? They have two different names. 1774.
The Intolerables.
That's right, intolerable acts or the coercive acts, right? Right. Most of those things were specific things that those acts alone did in Massachusetts or elsewhere. So then, if we reason then, I love this quote that Jefferson uses, what one quote from the Declaratory Act of 1766 sums up the American case against Britain?
The quote from King George or Parliament, I guess, the one that says, "Of right make laws to bind us in all cases whatsoever."
Mm-hmm. Excellent, right? And so what does Jefferson say about that? Why is that so scary?
Well, are you saying what he says right after that? What is to defend us against so enormous and so limited a power?
Excellent, right? Think of it. What is to defend us against so enormous, so unlimited a power? Unlimited governmental power. The exact opposite of what government was created to do, right? Government should be as small as possible to protect natural rights. And here he's saying, wait a minute, they have this unlimited power that they're grabbing, and they could do anything with it. And so, of course, right, he latches on to this quote from the Declaratory Act and just says, okay, if you want evidence, look to this. Of course, this is why we're resisting. And so if we relate this to ourselves then, would these offenses have been enough to make you want independence? Please explain.
Well, for me, I have to think it would. I have to say that this reading has been my favorite one so far.
Oh, great.
It actually brought me to tears.
Wow.
And I don't know if it's because we've talked about the third of the people cared, a third of the people, you know, were loyalists and whatnot, but even talking about it now, I get emotional because, I don't know, it's just that fighting for freedom and saying we're not going to do what you tell us to do when it's not right and you're not watching out for our best interests. It just, this whole thing, it was really moving to me. I really liked it.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I mean, I'm just touched just hearing how personally you took this and how much you were able to apply it and think about it. And thank you so much. Well, wonderful.
So I guess I have decided I think I know which third I would have been with.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for that. That's really, I'm happy to hear it. Well, if we look on page 28 then, and we look at the last paragraph on page 28, reason, what was the last straw for the colonies, according to Jefferson?
The unprovoked assault.
That's right, the unprovoked assault, and what was that unprovoked assault?
The shot heard around the world, yeah.
Excellent,
the Battle
right?
of Lexington and Concord.
Excellent. Nicely done, right? So this unprovoked assault, okay, this was when, okay, hey, listen, you know, we've been enduring no taxation, you know, or we've been enduring taxation without representation. We've been enduring all of these acts, and, you know, the tide of public opinion has been surging against Britain. But when you fire on us, when you are killing us, when you're supposed to be protecting us, wow, you know? And so if we think now, I mean, I'm curious about, I wonder if does this change anything for anybody? Maybe it doesn't. In my class here, it didn't at all. But would this act, meaning Lexington and Concord, have been enough for you to want to fight against Britain? What do you think?
It would have for me, I think. I think for me it would have said, you have overstepped your bounds. Mm-hmm. And you're hurting my neighbor, or you shot my dad, and we didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What other comments?
You know, I've been thinking about the time. When is it time to rise up against a corrupt government? Mm-hmm. And I think the whole reason it got corrupt in the first place is because, the people weren't virtuous. Like the founders said, it takes a religious and virtuous people for the Constitution to work. So it's the people's fault. I'm looking at America today, that it's in a situation now, but back then the people were ready for independence, like I said before. And so because they were ripe for independence, meaning they were virtuous, that means they were also on the Lord's side. And that means if they're on God's side, then God probably would back them up if they wanted to fight. But I'm thinking, would he back us up today?
Yeah.
And
that's a really good question, Caden.
Yeah, because I think if they fire on us or not, what if that happened right now in America, if we got fired on? And sure, we'd want to fight back, but would we win that war if we're not virtuous? if we're not on God's side?
Right.
I mean, it's just, it reminds me of you can't cast out devils with devils. And that's kind of harsh to say, but if we're not, if we've abandoned our founding documents that were given to us divinely, then how can we expect to be free? But back then, yeah, I'm sure getting fired on that'd be a great time to start fighting.
Caden, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. You know, and I think it is important to remember that here we have the colonies going up against the greatest, the strongest army on earth, but yet they were fighting with God, and so of course they won, right? I mean, it's just I love, talk about something that brings me to tears. You know, I love reading 1 Nephi 13. It is so powerful to talk about God's hand in history and God's hand in the creation of this great nation, and I think it's amazing to see how he did prosper the Americans against the mother country. Well, if we look here, the last two paragraphs on 29 and then the first paragraph on page 30, Jefferson talks about some alternatives facing the colonies, and what are those alternatives? What does he say? Can you reason those?
Yeah, submission to tyranny or resistance by force.
Excellent, right? And so, would you have made the same choice they did?
I think I would have.
Yeah. So, I mean, if those are the options, right? Here, I hear you. We would resist the tyranny instead of submit to this dreadful involuntary slavery, as they call it. Well, let's look here. I think this is important, though, because even with all we have said, even with blood shed by the British, by the government that's supposed to be protecting natural rights like life, liberty, and property, even after all this, there are some very important qualifications that Jefferson gives at the very end of this document. And so if you read the last three paragraphs on page 30, can you reason what qualification does he give to the colony's military resistance?
That it will cease as soon as the aggression ceases. Meaning Parliament's aggression, I guess, and Britain's.
Excellent, right? And what, in terms of it ceasing, right, then what, and this is something I think that in hindsight sometimes it's harder to understand, but what is he saying about the purpose of their fighting?
That it's not for separation, that it's, at this point, that it's just to get the tyranny to cease.
Excellent, right? We have not raised armies with ambitious designs of separating from Great Britain and establishing independent states. Think of it, 1775, they're still working for rights within the British Empire, hoping for a reconciliation. So it's important to note that. I have a little bit here. If we think about relating, was the war into which the Second Continental Congress thrust Americans a just war? And would you have made the same decision that it did? Why or why not? As we think about that, just because for the sake of time here, I just want to look at a couple quotes that I think are really telling. And please, go back to this PowerPoint if you want and read these quotes again. I think they're really, really interesting here. President Charles W. Penrose said something interesting. He said, "It is not right for us to engage in the shedding of human blood for vengeance or retaliation, but when the Lord commands or inspires his servants to counsel the sons and daughters of Israel to lend their aid in the work of righteous warfare, that is different. We are to arise in our might and in our strength and go forth to victory, not with a desire to shed blood, not with a desire to destroy our fellow creatures, but in self-defense, and because we do want to maintain and hand down to our posterity those sacred principles of liberty that have been revealed from on high." 1917 Congress report. Another quote, Elder David O. McKay, before he was president, said, "There are two conditions which may justify a truly Christian man to enter, mind you, I say enter, not begin, a war. One, an attempt to dominate and to deprive another of his free agency, and two, loyalty to his country. Possibly there is a third, namely defense of a weak nation that is being unjustly crushed by a strong, ruthless one." And then we won't have time to read all of it today, but I just want to point you to one of my favorite quotes on this subject. President Hinckley, you probably remember this, April 2003 General Conference. As the prophet of the church, War and Peace was the title of this talk. It was just unbelievable. read it for family home evening tonight if you want. But modern revelation states that we are to renounce war and proclaim peace. In a democracy, we can renounce war and proclaim peace. There is opportunity for dissent. Many have been speaking out and doing so emphatically. That is their privilege. That is their right, so long as they do so legally. However, we all must also be mindful of another overriding responsibility, which, I may add, governs my personal feelings and dictates my personal loyalties in the present situation. When war raged between the Nephites and the Lamanites, the record states that the Nephites were inspired by a better cause, for they were not fighting for power, but they were fighting for their homes and their liberties, their wives and their children, and their all, yea, for their rights of worship and their church, and they were doing that which they felt was the duty which they owed to their God, etc. Talks about defending families to blood, even unto bloodshed. And then President Hinckley closes by saying, it is clear from these and other writings that there are times and circumstances when nations are justified, in fact have an obligation to fight for family, for liberty, and against tyranny, threat, and oppression. When all is said and done, we of this church are people of peace. We are followers of our Redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ, who was the Prince of Peace. But even he said, think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. This places us in the position of those who long for peace, who teach peace, who work for peace, but who also are citizens of nations and are subject to the laws of our governments. Furthermore, we are a freedom-loving people, committed to the defense of liberty wherever it is in jeopardy. I believe that God will not hold men and women in uniform responsible as agents of their government in carrying forward that which they are legally obligated to do. It may even be that he will hold us responsible if we try to impede or hedge up the way of those who are involved in a contest with forces of evil and repression. Close quote. Well, unfortunately, we don't have time, but can you just please think, was the American Revolution a just war? Think about why. Try to understand that. And think about these wonderful quotes from the brethren here as we think about just war, because, of course, this document is this justification of military resistance, this declaration of war for the Second Continental Congress against Britain. I really appreciate your 4R'ing today. It was truly wonderful. It was moving for me. I'm grateful that you're allowing these documents to change you in some way, and I'm glad you're thinking about them so deeply. So thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, we'll talk about Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.